Today's guest is Leise Sandeman, co-founder at Pathways. Leise, thank you for coming on the show.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I mean, I love the topic, that your expertise your expertise in sustainability and green buildings and all that stuff. So I'm looking forward to digging into your background.
Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining most people listening here, like the two of us, are nerdy about how this whole space works and how to actually do real difference. I call it when you're working with materials and construction, right?
I like that real difference because sometimes, people or initiatives have good, intentions, but
Mm.
the execution of it, whether it's their fault or not, it's just not what it takes to make a change. So, what's been your experience over your course of your career?
Yeah, uh, I guess what I like to say, and when I think about what I'm doing today and the path in my career to lead me to working specifically with material manufacturers, is to say, well, you got to go where real people are making real changes, right? If you want to decarbonize a building, it's like Lego. You gotta decarbonize each brick, and that normally happens for steel beam at the actual facility where someone is producing that steel beam. And a lot of sustainability is often made very elitist or highbrow, but in my mind, it's facility manager, product line responsibility, procurement officials who can move the needle on the many small decisions that end up adding up.
Yeah. So not looking at it holistically, more like, here, what are the components? What can be done at a very individual level?
It gets very practical, right? I like to say like sustainability is like a if you reduce the electricity you're using for a specific machinery, or if you are reusing the water at your plant, right? It isn't fancy or complex. It's like very real changes.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess each, so if you're looking at it at a very specific level, each,
Mhm.
um, call it brick, steel beam, whatnot, has, a different, manufacturing process, different
Yeah.
players, and stuff like that. So, I mean, it becomes like a huge thing. And what are the areas that you're seeing change occurring? Like, because
Mhm.
I'm sure some areas don't have the
Mhm.
same level of focus, or maybe there isn't the same level of opportunity
Yeah.
as other areas.
No, no, absolutely. I mean, I like to say it's different manufacturers have different responsibilities in that supply chain. I was listening to a podcast the other day with someone in real estate, right? A real estate developer who was talking about scope three. In sustainability, that just means everything you're buying down your supply chain. But I was like, well, we kind of work with what I think of as everyone else's scope three, the actual manufacturers who are producing something. But if we think about, for example, cement and concrete, right? The cement manufacturers and the plants that produce cement are where most of the emission is made in the actual kiln. And then in concrete, the biggest decision is where do you get your cement from? So it's more of a supplier decision, right? It's not your own production, it's who do you buy from. Those are two very different ways of making improvements, right? Whether it's who do I buy from or how do I improve my own manufacturing process. But the analysis to understand which is which and what can you do is very similar. Kind of the life cycle assessment of that specific product.
Yeah. Now, when you look at it, I mean, and you're trying to make a change,
Mm,
there's, I guess, some processes, the leverage or the ability to change it as at a different point. Maybe it's at purchasing, maybe it's not, maybe it's at the factory level. I mean, what are examples of, both, where one, maybe it was at the purchasing level, maybe there was like an innate incentive to do it a certain way, and what was the incentive at a manufacturer or more of a raw ingredient level,
mm.
in terms of incentives?
Yeah. I mean, let's take a few different examples if we think about the US and the building space, right? We're seeing these new buy clean regulations come out at state and federal level, requiring something like the General Services Administration the biggest purchaser of materials in all of the US, actually saying, well, if we are to purchase a particular steel product, it needs to be below a certain global warming potential level. That all sounds like a lot of different jargon, but really practically what that means is that specific plant where a steel beam is produced needs to figure out how to reduce its the footprint of the electricity it's consuming, as well as increase the share of scrap. Um, we've been working at Pathways with a manufacturer in the steel space who made a lot of improvements, but then had a really hard time figuring out, you know, the plant managers were running and making these improvements based on gut. We know this is what we need to do. But then they didn't know, have we improved 5% or have we improved 25%? And I think that's where, I mean, at Pathways, I like to say we don't come up with the silver bullets, we come up with small slivers of silver. But what we're good at is helping figure out, was it 5% or 25%?
Mm.
Which today is often like a black box for someone at a floor.
Hmm. So, so I guess, how do you help people figure it out? What does your process look like?
Yeah. Um, so at Pathways, I mean, we think of ourselves as building the data layer for sustainable manufacturing. But again, that's just a ton of jargon. What that practically means is our software creates lifecycle assessments for individual product lines. So down to what is the footprint of this specific product at this specific site. So just come out with a case study with one of our earlier partners, Stella Jones. They make utility poles, right? So actually understanding what's the footprint of each utility pole or railroad tie. The way we do that is by integrating into their data stack. Which means we pull unstructured ERP information, think about all of your supplier documentation, all your production levels, and then we structure and organizing it using AI on our backend. In the simple terms, it's what you used to have to hire a consultant to do it manually, and we're automating that process.
Yeah, you're automating it. I guess, is it based on, companies that use a certain type of ERP system that you're kind of integrating with, or is it just more holistic tool?
No, I mean, we can integrate with um, any ERP system or any kind of production system. I mean, done dozens so far. I guess what's our philosophy? Um, what's really annoying today is if you want to understand the environmental footprint of what you're doing as a manufacturer, someone on a sustainability team most likely has to call up a facility manager and ask them to like go in and download or explain or send them specific data. And the philosophy we've had is, well, you keep most of this data for a different purpose. You might not be tracking your water consumption, but someone sure is paying for it. Or you might not be keeping track of what chemicals are used in a specific production process, but you have receival information about those chemicals because you are keeping track of that for production reasons, or bill of materials or safety documentation. So instead of asking people to duplicate or redo data collection, we try to go to the pockets where that data already exists.
Mhm. So basically, you sort of tap into all the pieces of data, and then if they go through the improvement process, you can see the alteration of that and create, those percentage gains and stuff like that.
That's exactly like my most exciting moment is when someone has made an improvement that they can see that improvement only weeks later versus years, which is normally kind of the cycle of improvement, which is also very demotivating. Like we all like to see the results if we've made something.
Yeah.
And even more importantly, sales and marketing teams would like to claim the benefit out in the market when they've made sustainability improvements.
Yeah. So for marketing purposes, your first example is compliance, right?
Yeah.
Related to, certain programs or certifications, or call
Mm.
it government related standards, and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, and I mean, this is a space that's moving really fast. I was on a call the other day with a steel sheet manufacturer, salesman, who said, well, 2-3 years ago, I'd never heard about this requirement, and now I can't make a sale because I don't have a document that I didn't even know about. And I think that's incredibly frustrating. And when you're then told, well, it'll take a year to generate it, and you have to pay tens of thousands of dollars, that starts becoming really painful. So, yeah, shortening that time to both claim the benefits when you've made improvements as well as like enable decarbonization.
Okay, good. So where's
Yeah.
the AI component of it? Because when I hear AI and I see tools, it's hard to know what part of it is AI and what's not. I know things are advancing very, very quickly, but for you, what part of it is AI driven?
Yeah. So in our space specifically, we are what's the most valuable thing we can do is turn a lot of this unstructured data that previously people had to manually go through and apply their intuition to understand how it applied to a life cycle assessment. And that's where we're applying AI most heavily. It's in the ingestion of that unstructured data. Um, so if you think of a bill of materials, you might want all your suppliers to name things consistently. But if you ask any manufacturer, nothing is named consistently. And most manufacturers have also had some kind of acquisitions or changes, and they run on different systems. So really in that data parsing and structuring and organizing is where we've trained a large language model to help structure and pass through data. And that just saves so much time and lets us get much closer to real time, and that's where we're applying it. We're not inventing new data, we're not coming up with data, so we're not having a gen AI model kind of hallucinate or make up things. We're all about finding the real data.
Got it. So basically, you just try and take everyone's data and making it consistent so that you can
Yeah,
measure it in similar ways.
exactly. It's I like to say people in sustainability spend 80% of their time collecting data and then 20% of time improving. We'd like to switch those around so that you can spend 80% of your time actually taking actions. There's plenty of actions to be taken.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what are some examples that or companies that are doing very
Mm.
great things in this area, like overall in terms of practices?
Mm. Oh, um, a lot of different ones come in mind. To be honest, I mean, um, um, let's look at the steel space, for example, in the US. Really like what Nucor is doing, what Godot is doing. I mean, a lot of the US manufacturers are doubling. I mean, they've been doubling down historically on electric arc furnace. That looks really different than the rest of the world, where we still have a lot of integrated mills and blast furnace. For those people less deep in manufacturing, electric arc furnace, as it sounds like, is relying on electricity, which means as you improve the grid, you're able to claim that benefit in the manufacturing process, or if you increase your recycled scrap share instead of using raw iron ore. Um, and there's I mean, Steel Dynamics as well in the US are doing really really cool things. And then there's a lot of smaller manufacturers that are taking a lot of steps in their production process to be more energy efficient, do more water reuse, more local recycling, and and I guess a few truly kind of what I call material innovative companies in the cement space. I think of something like Semvision or Secrete, some few smaller new hard science technologies to innovate on materials.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I mean, your company, there's other companies, like you said, you're trying to break out and trying to get their ideas more accepted,
Hmm. Yeah.
maybe help, scale it so it starts reducing costs around that.
Hmm.
And what are some of the practices you see
Mm.
in terms of, spreading great ideas? Like what can we
Mm.
do to get more of these ideas into the building industry?
Mm. Gosh, this is such a hard challenge, right? I think the building industry has a sometimes faulty self-image of being slow moving. Some of this just comes from if you're making a building and a project. I mean, you are making something to last, right? So people in the building space have natural long horizons. right? They think in 30, 40-year increments, not in 1, 2 year increments. The challenge with that is if you are a startup or a younger, more innovative solution, you think in months or years. You want to be moving the needle, and there can be a bit of a gap of how to bridge those two. I mean, I think the best folks in the building space, whether that be on the real estate side, on the architect side, on the construction side, or where we sit all the way down the supply chain at the manufacturing space, what they are really good at is taking things in, testing a pilot, and then seeing if it works. Right. And I think this pilot mentality is really smart. And I mean, just in the building space, and I'm in the building sustainability vertical specifically, there's a lot of really cool innovations out there. Tool, Tangible does embodied carbon in buildings. Qflow out of the UK, they help contractors on their sustainability footprint, and I think starting to see these move much faster.
Is that so the pilot process how you got your business off the ground?
Yeah, it really is. Like, I think we like to say, let us just show you that we can add value. And then sometimes we haven't hit it yet, but sometimes it doesn't work out, right? It's like, oh, whatever we have or the solution isn't the right match. And then there's not a lot lost in a pilot, right? So I think with most of our partners, we say, well, do you have a plant or do you have a product line that where you would like to see a life cycle assessment and an environmental product declaration? Let's try to do that one. There's nothing lost. You could do the traditional consulting route and do it all manually, or you could try a more automated approach.
Yeah. What level of complexity or size kind of makes like sort of an ideal fit for your what you're doing? Because obviously, if it's
Yeah.
too small, it's not. But if they're too big, maybe they're more risk reverse or there's more change involved. What's kind of the what do you find the sweet spot for a company
Yeah.
to deal with?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. If you're only wanting to do this one off for a tiny production, we're probably not the right fit. That said, we have customers who range from a single ready mix concrete site in Long Island. Give me one second. A bit of allergies here. A single site in Long Island for ready mix concrete, all the way up to, I mean, $20 billion plus international companies. Right, our value of our data integration becomes bigger when you have complexity. But the reality is, even for manufacturers who have one or two production sites, if they have multiple product lines or they want to be able to communicate this on a project level rather than on a product level, right? So a customer specific emission footprint.
Mm.
As soon as you start entering into that, you're getting such complexity that it's worth doing automatic instead of doing manually.
Got it. Project level. I never considered that. Like it may be your product, but the project hinges on, the customer understanding it from a project standpoint. And if you can add value to that process and, no one else steps up to say, we can help you figure this out, then you kind of have a very good in terms of, holding that relationship.
Yeah, and I mean, we have a partner in a really cool company, H Window in the curtain wall space, and as our partner there said, no one is interested in like a square foot of window. They're interested in the actual combination of wall, window, and door that they are buying for their specific project. So that's what's relevant, not kind of some arbitrary metric. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. That's a very interesting way of looking at value add. They're going to keep coming back to you for your specific product if you can
Mm.
solve a larger problem for them.
Yeah. And ultimately, I mean, I'm sure that's what everyone in this space wants to do. Like make life easier so that we can actually decarbonize, right? Everyone deserves good, safe housing and infrastructure, but we just need to do it greener every time we build.
Yeah. I noticed you do a bunch of teaching as well. How or have done. What is that about?
Um, I guess that's just something I really really love to do, right? I think I really enjoyed myself being taught, and brilliant teachers or people who take the time to explain things in, again, like not making it highbrow, not making it too elitist. I mean, some of my teaching has been at some pretty elitist institutions.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sure
see
you're looking
Harvard
at
here,
some.
so yes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think about getting the privilege to be a teaching assistant at a place like Harvard to professors who are so deep in their topic, and you get to come in for a short while and help in that communication angle, right? How do you translate someone's deep expertise, like one professor I work for in the energy and geopolitics space, right? Her perspective on like critical minerals was so complex that it's almost hard to translate into I'll call myself a layman, and I love that gap, translating things so that they don't so that they're easy to understand.
Yeah. So, I mean, any tips? Because I know, like in the material space, some things can be very um, complex, and maybe the customer doesn't understand the value or what's happening. What have
Mhm.
you learned about, what sort of things you need to do to make it sort of easier to digest?
Yeah, I think the first is a mindset, which is most people I've met, in fact, everyone I've met in the construction space, in the building space, in the manufacturing space are like really clever, thoughtful people who are like trying their best to do a good job. And what's really hard is if you're being talked down to, or talked above your head, or people use acronyms or descriptions that you haven't heard before and they don't, I mean, no jargon busting. I think of a very small thing we've done in our product. So these life cycle assessments don't just count carbon, they also count biodiversity factors. And this all comes from the science of life cycle assessments, but some of these factors are very hard to understand. There's one called eutrophication potential, right? Unless you have like a chemical degree, you're unlikely to know what this means. But the climate impact is algae bloom. So in our product, we just call it algae bloom. Turns out everyone knows what an algae is. Then, there's like a little question mark and you can see the exact Latin definition. But using terms or derivatives or other consequences that people understand, I mean, is really beneficial. We have a structural engineer, I should say, on our team, Dorian, and she's really good at translating a lot of what I think of as like highbrow engineering terms into layman's term, like structural integrity. Is it solid? Does it stand? Ultimately, like a building isn't that complex.
Yeah, very cool. I love it. Uh, let's see. I mean, anything else? I mean, your company in the building space, whether you're a manufacturer or not. I mean, what sort of other things should people be aware of or can do proactively to push sustainability forward?
Mm. I mean, I think the reality in the building space is for a lot of manufacturers, it's not anyone's full time job, right? It falls between a lot of chairs, and it's we all know that thing that's like 10 to 20% of our 20% of our job, and it can just become, frankly, overwhelming because the problem with the 10 to 20% is they add up across a lot of different roles, and then suddenly you're at 160% of your own capacity. I think one of the things I like to say to people in sustainability is that it's not meant to be that complex. It's about either reducing resources or figuring out how to buy things in a smarter way. Um, and environmental, like sustainability, is all about reducing one of those two factors. And that's a lot of small choices every day, recycling, making local improvements, and then having a mindset that it doesn't have to be that hard. I think is a good first principle.
I like that. Just, sometimes the little things that we do every single day or can do every single day is overlooked. And, instead of that big thing that you could put in front of someone, it's just the little things that accumulate over time. And those things matter just as much as any occasional big thing that could occur.
Yeah. No, absolutely. If there was a silver bullet, we would have found the silver bullet. The reality is in the material space, in the construction space, my belief is it's a lot of slivers of silver. There'll be a few big silver bullets that people are innovating on, but for most people in their day-to-day jobs, if they are in these spaces, it's about finding those slivers of silver and not discounting those, but counting them up and making them matter.
Right. Well said. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing your expertise.
No, it was such a pleasure being on a podcast in this space and talking through some of these challenges.